Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Punch, Kick, Choke Chat. It is 8:30 on Tuesday night here in Toronto, and I'm just so excited for tonight's show. You know I get excited for all of these, but I'm always especially excited for me to learn new things in the sense that we have a guest tonight who studied some arts that I hadn't been familiar with before tonight. The arts, yes, the branches and the lineages, no. And I'm so excited to not just chat with him, but have Sensei Suino really open up the conversation as they have a relationship with one another. My name is Sean Benson. I'm one of your hosts, and it's my pleasure every single week to introduce Sensei Nicholas Suino, who is an 8th Dan in Iaido, a 6th Dan in Japanese Jiu-Jitsu, a 6th Dan in Judo. And by the way, our guest tonight and him have something in common. Sensei Suino was one of the founding members of the Shudokan Martial Arts Association. And you know, I've known Sensei Suino for, acquaintance 25 years, known him for 15, I'd say. And it always blows my mind when I do this research on our guests, how absolutely deep and deeply respected his roots go in the martial arts community. And so I just want to throw that out, you know, to be a founding member of the organization of which our guest tonight is a member and bringing forth the martial arts. These are real things. These are the platforms on which we stand. So thanks for that, Sensei Suino. How are you doing this week?
Doing great, Sean. Great to see you. I'm not very good at lighting tonight, so if you're having trouble seeing me, I apologize. At some point, I'll get up and turn the switch, but you know, maybe it's better to just hear my dulcet tones than it is to see this crusty old face of mine.
There's mystique around your look tonight.
Exactly. Yeah, thank you so much for the introduction. It's always great. There's no greater honor than to be introduced by somebody who knows how to make an introduction. And I thank you for that. And I also thank you for the long history we've had together, you know, between training in the St. Thomas dojo together, training in the Kitchener dojo together, training at JMAC in Ann Arbor, sitting on my front porch under a full moon, late into the night is one of my fond memories of not too many years ago, pre-COVID. I look forward to doing that again as soon as we can. So yeah, Sean, thanks for everything you've done in the last few years to contribute to a great martial arts history. It falls to me each time we do this show to introduce Sensei Randy Dauphin. Many of you know him. Many of you who are on this call, and I recognize some names, have come to one of the generations of JMAC or another when Sensei Fabian was teaching there. And so I just want to recognize Brian Barnes, Matthew Hawthorne. I'm sure there are others whose names don't show up, but and you've met Randy, trained with him. You may or may not have recognized that. He is one of those people who is the first to volunteer to put on a white belt if that's appropriate under the circumstances, despite the fact that he's very high ranking in karate and Iaido and has done extremely well on the international stage. So humble when it is called for, the opposite of humble when the opposite of humble is called for appropriately. And just a long-standing training partner of mine, the real brains behind this show that we're having tonight. And somebody that within minutes of when the border opens between US and Canada post-pandemic, I hope we can find our way to the same dojo and get some training in together. Randy, how are you doing tonight?
I'm good, but on this call, I wouldn't consider myself the brains behind anything in this group of people. Thanks so much for that, Sensei. I was, you put me in touch with Lucas, who I was talking to, and then I watched your podcast with Lucas, the young German gentleman, and Sensei Suino said something I really liked that I'm gonna butcher it, but he said, in order to be good at something, you must first be willing to be bad at it. And I've been thinking about that a lot. Like I watched that podcast and I spent a lot of time thinking about that. That's just one of those universal truths, like period. Like there's no arguing that statement. So thanks for that intro, Sensei. And yeah, when the border opens, all of us will be together somewhere as soon as possible. I tonight will be introducing Stephen Fabian and Sensei Legacy. And what I want to say about Sensei Legacy is that he's a 10th Dan and he was awarded that by his teacher, Anthony Sandoval. Lots of accolades. Most recently, he was inducted into the Canadian Black Belt Hall of Fame with lots of other. That's that's not one of those Hall of Fames where, you know, you fill out something and then all of a sudden you're in it. Like, it really does take a lifetime of training to get into the Canadian Black Belt Hall of Fame. He's an author. His senseis have been Harold Warden, Benny Allen, Richard Kim, and currently it is Anthony Sandoval, and actually also Sensei Suino. He has a black belt from Sensei Suino as well. I was with Sensei on Saturday and we started talking about, I just want to share a funny story. I think it speaks to our relationship a little bit. For 3 years, Sensei Legacy tried to steal my coffee, my Tim Hortons coffee. For 3 years, he tried to. Because he would always drink his coffee faster than me. And so then he'd want to switch it so he could get my, and one day we were sitting at Tim Hortons and he was sitting in front of me and he did this, he nodded his head and I looked over my shoulder. And when I looked over my shoulder, there was an old woman sitting there and she smiled at me. And I turned around and I said, Sensei, you just took my coffee, didn't you? He says, yep, your coffee is mine. Now, on a serious note, I also want to let you know that Sensei Legacy was the karate instructor at the University of Western Ontario for like 35 years. That's where Sean met him. That's where I met him. And I'll tell you that I saw some pretty interesting things. Sensei Legacy often, when he's demonstrating, will say, if you don't think I can do what I say I'm doing, or if you think my black belts are going along with me, you can come out here and I'll do it to you. And lo and behold, one night, a guy took his socks and shoes off and walked out onto the floor. He is big too, like big guy. And he said to Sensei Legacy, I don't think you can get out of my bear hug. And he said, will you go ahead and throw me in your bear hug? And this guy grabbed a hold of Sensei Legacy and started to lift him off of the ground. And Sensei Legacy smiled and put his hands behind his back and grabbed a hold of him by the groin. and you'd like to think that that's where it ends, but this guy made the most funny sounds that you'll ever hear a person make. A lot, because he didn't let go for a while. He didn't grab him and let go. He grabbed and held on for a while. So, and interestingly, that guy never joined karate. I don't know why, but he never stayed. He didn't come back. So that's my introduction for Sensei Legacy tonight. Lots of accolades and also willing to back it up when he says he can do something. And now I'm going to introduce Sensei Steve Fabian. One of the things that's really interesting, I like Sensei Fabian, he's a Ph.D. in cultural anthropology, and he got that degree from the University of Illinois. I value education. I always like it when I'm around. He's also an educator. He's a high school teacher. I value that. He's also an author of a really good book. If you haven't read it, you should get it and read it. I love it. It's called Clearing Away the Clouds, 9 Lessons for Life from the Martial Arts. You won't have the one that I have because mine is autographed directly to me from him, but you can have a lesser copy if you want. He is also, as Sean mentioned, one of the co-founders of the Shudokan, which is a martial arts association that I belong to as well. And he's been in Asian martial arts for his entire life. He's a 7th Dan in Jiu-Jitsu and he's a 4th Dan in Iaido. He trains in, I'm sorry, Sensei Fabian, I might mess this up, so you can correct me. He trains in classical Hontai Yoshin Ryu, a Ryu that specializes in Jiu-Jitsu in the study of classical weaponry. He resided for several years in Japan and is the direct disciple of Inoue Soke. Is that right? Did I say that right? Inoue Soke, the 18th generation headmaster of that style. Fabian Sensei receives high-level teaching certificates from Inoue Soke in that system, and he's believed to be the first American ever licensed to teach that ancient Ryu in the United States. He's also studied Hontai Yoshin Ryu and Toyama Ryu Iaido in Japan. In 1989, he became the Toyama Ryu Iaido All-Japan champion in the men's Shodan Nidan division. Fabian Sensei is division director in the Shudokan, as we talked about. for me, a couple of the things that I want to say about him, I had the opportunity to train with Sensei Fabian a few times. I watched a video of him today where he was talking to the students about the black belt just being the beginning. And I really enjoyed hearing somebody talking about that. And everybody should go listen to those words, because that is the truth. That's another truism. Another thing I know of Sensei Fabian is he doesn't let obstacles get in the way. And how I can back up that statement is because he got on a plane and moved to Japan to learn martial arts. Some people would consider that a pretty big obstacle, and he didn't let that get in his way.
Yeah.
I remember the seminar at JMAC Gen 1 that I trained with him. I had a couple of black belts there. His class was so fun. He was very fun. He's very skilled. He's a very good teacher. The other thing that he's able to do is he can motivate people to work and to work hard. I worked really hard in his class, and it was easy to be motivated to work hard in his class, which is something, but he also has the ability to teach the techniques. So that combination is also very good. The another thing that it's funny that Brian is on this call, because he stands out in my mind, and Sensei Fabian students also stand out in my mind because they were all really nice people and all really skilled and all very helpful and really wanted to help people get the techniques. And I think that speaks to the teacher, right? Like attracts like. You attract the people around you that are similar to you. And for me, I'm going to let Sensei Suno say a couple of things, but when I think of Sensei Fabian, I think of a great combination of intelligence, spirit, and technical ability. I think that's a winning combination.
Well, that's an amazing introduction, and I think you've teed up a lot of subjects that I really want to get into today. Steve and I share a similar journey of having gone to Asia to study martial arts and then having had a little bit of success in competitions over there. And I think that set us both up for a kind of trajectory as we came back. So I want to talk more about that and the experience of living in Japan and competing as a foreigner. I want to talk more about the responsibilities of having that kind of honor and then coming back and trying to maintain the traditions. And I want to talk about this idea of the pen and the sword in accord. It's a really interesting path. It's one that I've followed, and clearly it's one that Steve's followed as well. So yeah, I don't have a lot more to say, but I definitely think we're in a position to tee up some really interesting conversations tonight. And I believe with that said, we need to go over to Sean so we can start the festivities.
Yeah, thanks so much, Sensei Suino. And as I said in my own intro, I'm really excited to have you lead a lot of our charge tonight. I know that that's going to be the best interview we could possibly have. Just some housekeeping notes that I give every week. There are questions that we want you to ask. They're in your head, unless they're shitty questions, in which case we don't want you to ask them. But we'll be the judge of whether they're good or not. So enter them in the chat button at the bottom of the screen. And then Andre, who's hosting tonight, he'll punt them over to us, and we'll be able to ask them of our guests tonight. And, it's a pretty unique position you're in if you're watching, because you get to be part of this living history in real time, as opposed to the people who are going to be listening or watching later on YouTube or any of the other podcast platforms where all our shows end up available. And then the other thing I want to say, you've heard me drop the S-bomb. This is 5 adults having a conversation called Punch, Kick, Choke, Chat. If any of the content doesn't agree with you, we're not fussed about it. We'll never care. But if you do care, just know that I don't know where you go with that. I don't know I have a therapist. I can give you his number. I just want to say that we've structured this show after the idea of you're hearing masters talk, and you get to kind of be at the table or in the back seat of the car. 2 quick things I want to say before I tell you who my alter ego is. One, Sensei Dauphin is so incredibly humble about this show. And we all do carry our weight, but it absolutely was his idea, and he absolutely was the brains behind it. And then just very quickly, imagine just walking into a university dojo and going, oh, I might try a new hobby. And then Hanshi Legacy just happens to be your instructor. Like, what a lucky thing. It could have not been that. And so I just want to say how grateful I am to whatever gods put me at the club's fair to go, oh, there's this thing called karate, 2-week free demo. And then he happens to be the instructor and has been my instructor ever since. So I just want to say I'm really grateful, not just to him, but because I don't tend to introduce him, but to the luck and the chance that brought me there. What do you mean, alter ego, Sean? Well, hi, I'm Don Warner. And I am from Warner, WARRENER, entertainment.com. We're proud to be one of the sponsors of Punch, Kick, Choke, Chat. We encourage you to visit our website at warnerentertainment.com and get your free copy of Warriors Magazine today. We have over 2,500 items, including books, DVDs, downloads, rare posters, lots more, featuring some of the biggest names in the martial arts. Shudokan's Hidekazu Kanazawa, Goju Ryu's Chuck Merriman, Ninja Stephen Hayes, legendary Joe Louis, and that's just the beginning. That's warnerentertainment.com, WARRENER. Thanks for listening. And I love that he put this in the copy. Keep smiling. So,
John, you should. I thought you'd have it memorized by now. You're saying it three. You're an actor.
You know, I'm going to give you a little hint. And this, you know, my eyesight's good, my memory's good, but God, do I love if I can do a scene with the lines just right there. It's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful thing. It frees up my night before to have baths and watch mountain bike and jiu-jitsu videos till 3 a.m. So that's it for the housekeeping notes. Can't wait to hear your questions. Sensei Fabian, how do you like hearing that introduction from Sensei Dofran, from your friend Sensei Suino? How does it feel to be our guest tonight and hear yourself talked up that way?
Yeah, well, you guys are great. It's very humbling to, hear people kind of rattle off your accomplishments. It's not something that we get every day. So I appreciate it. Thank you guys. Very, very generous in your praise. But I think I'm going to just say it takes one to know one. So I think that, all of you have your own accolades kind of lined up on your behalf. And I'm just thrilled to be here, part of this conversation, part of this series. I'm honored that, you asked me to come on board, and I'm looking forward to having a good conversation. It's been a while since I've been able to really kind of just chat with, a bunch of like-minded martial artists. And this is really special. So I'm going to enjoy every minute of it.
That's great. We're so happy you're here. So I'm going to start off with a couple questions, and then we really are going to have Sensei Suino really crack open what he knows more about than we could. But the one thing I'm really always curious about is what brought you into your first dojo and what kept you there?
Yeah. Okay. So I think compared to some people, I probably had a little bit of a late start. I didn't really start martial arts training until I was a 20-year-old college student. Before that, I had done a lot of interscholastic sports. I graduated scholar athlete in my high school class, playing football and running track. And I went to Colgate University to kind of continue that. But after a couple of years of those and pulling sod out of my helmet, being on the scout offense against our starting varsity defense team and stuff like that, I'm just happy I got out of that in one piece. And I needed something else to do with my time. And in the back of my mind had been this show that, doesn't stand up all too well in terms of the action scenes over time, but David Carradine starring as Kane, in the Kung Fu series, and especially the initial movie for it. That was a huge, just inspirational experience for me. I had never really seen anything like it. I was doing my own sort of quest for something that was able to bring mind, body, and spirit together, and hence the scholar athlete thing in my high school. And the interscholastic collegiate sports just weren't doing that for me. Maybe I wasn't good enough, whatever the story was. What really turned me into martial arts was that I had a friend at Colgate University, Chinese American young man, same grade as I was there, same class, and he was from New York City, and he was a black belt in Sikaran karate, a style I've never heard of before or since, but he had all the bona fides, and he was really itching to get a group of guys together to just start a training group. And so very humble beginnings. That's how we started. And we would train wherever we could find space. It might've been on a racquetball court. It might've been outside if the weather was good. And then we joined the once a week self-defense / martial arts class that was taught by a guy named Jaeger Sensei. Arthur Chan was my friend's name. Give him a shout out. But anyway, this retired Navy man, big, brawny guy, looked like a real brawler type. In fact, he worked as a bouncer in a bar, and he represented a Goju Ryu system. And so that was sort of my first taste, but I did that for a couple of years until I graduated. So, I mean, it just took me one session to be. There was no doubt. There was no turning back. It was
Yeah.
like I need this stuff, and it was a little bit of a carrot and a stick motivation, because training with Jaeger, Sensei Jaeger, and his top student, both big brawny guys. I mean, I'm about 5'9" now, and those guys are both over 6 feet and very powerful guys. The Goju system did very hard external style, really just, bone breaking blocks and punches and things like that. And we would spar with them a little bit, and it was like scary. It was like, I didn't like the idea of my vulnerability when facing somebody that skilled and that powerful. And I was like, I got to keep doing this. Not that I love doing it. I don't want to meet somebody like that and not stand a better chance of accounting for myself. So it was a great motivating factor.
So the harder it got, the harder you trained.
The only way to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. You and I shared a slightly similar path there. I'd been told by the coach of the varsity volleyball team at my school, where I was doing my science degree, that I could be an alternate, but I was basically going to be feeding balls to the guys who were going to play. Yeah. And I just said, I appreciate your honesty. I'm not going to do that. And that's the day I walked down and saw the clubs fair and found the very similar thing you found. So we came at it a very similar way. I appreciate that. So how long did you stay with that? And at what point did you start moving toward the arts that you've been doing as the primary focus of your training? When did you move to the Toyama and the Yoshin?
Yeah, so we'll have to break all that down, and I don't want to just sit and talk, but once I graduated from Colgate, I went immediately into graduate school at the University of Illinois. And one of the first things I did, contrary to what most other graduate students do when they go to graduate school, I sought out a martial arts academy that I could train in. And I really shopped around. I mean, that was the advice I got from both Jaeger Sensei and Arthur Chan, was to shop around, visit a class, talk to the instructor, actually observe a class or even, train as a guest in it to get a sense of whether or not it clicks for you. And that was great advice, so I did that. I kind of shopped around. There were a couple of university clubs, and there were a couple of academies in town. The one I ended up in is a Taekwondo school. Hyung Nam-kwan, now deceased, 2-time silver medalist in the Korean national champions of Taekwondo. So that means he's about the top of the world in that particular style. And he was just a dynamo. I mean, just everything you would imagine a Korean master of Taekwondo to be. Just strong, untiring, flexible. I mean, the whole bit. But he also had a deeply rooted sense of Asian philosophy, and he would talk about that a lot. So I mean, he was feeding all of my mind, body, spirit, desires at the time. So I stuck with the Taekwondo as long as I was a graduate student at the University of Illinois. Eventually got a second degree, a Yidan, second degree black belt in Taekwondo with them, with about 1.5 to 2 years of a hiatus in that training when my wife and I went to Brazil to do our graduate field work as anthropologists. That's another story and another lifetime.
So I just, Sensei, if I could just chip in, I want to break something open here, and I want to defer to all the other senseis with this as well. You have a somewhat unique perspective on this. I was doing some homework like we do for the week, and you do recommend going and trying out a bunch of different flavors. And I know that a lot of classical schools tend to be like, well, you're here or you're not. So maybe if you can talk about that, and then I want to throw it to Hanshi and the two senseis for their thoughts on that. So how do you know your school's the best if you don't take other taste tests?
So my particular take on that is that if you're in a phase where you are looking to join a school or a system, the best way to do that is to shop around, for your own sake, and you can only do that to the extent that a school is going to allow you to. You have to be totally respectful of what their norms and rules are as well. But once you've committed to a system, I mean, you really need to commit. And you also need to observe the kind of restrictions and rules of that system. All of the traditional systems are very reluctant to just allow people to shop around and continue to train in multiple styles, at least all the ones I know of, when you are a member of their, classical system, unless to teach themselves. So I had a rather unique experience in Japan where I joined the Hontai Yoshin Ryu, but the Soke, Inoue Soke, was also a top tier instructor of the Toyama Ryu Yamaguchi-ha, and he started teaching me one-on-one in his private dojo, Toyama Ryu, because at that time, Hontai Yoshin Ryu had still not fully integrated EI into its curriculum. There were EI components to it, but they hadn't been codified adequately. And subsequently, there has been loaded into Hontai Yoshin Ryu this whole EI Jitsu curriculum. But at that time, so it was encouraging students to train in an EI style to complement the other weapons and empty-handed style. So he took me on as a student in that. But I mean, in general, shop around when you're looking for a place, but when you find a place, you got to give the respect to that school, to that teacher, to that system.
Yeah. Any other senseis want to add anything to that? Sensei Legacy, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I agree. I sort of have those thoughts along where there is all sorts of different martial arts, and you need to look around to see something that you're going to enjoy and like. Because if you're struggling with it, it's going to make things harder. But once you decide to choose a club, that you should become loyal and do what the sensei says. That you need him for every aspect, body, mind, spirit, teaching, like Richard Kim, for instance. And it's necessary. You will never completely experience martial arts unless you have a sensei, so he can bring you there, right? There's always somebody smarter than you. I agree with what he's saying.
Sensei Suino?
Yeah, absolutely. And furthermore, I think all of us on this call have had a period of obsession about what we do. And so I think you get in, you commit, and then we figure out that this is what you're going to do. You have to do it like your life depends on it. And for a year and a half, 2 years, or forever, I think if you don't, you're missing out. I've been writing about this a lot lately. Half of it is the martial art coming to you, but the other half is you coming to the martial art. The more robustly you come to it, the more you get out of it. So yeah, I 100% agree.
And then Sensei Dauphin, you want to add anything to that? Any ideas?
I had a question for Sensei Suino. When officially does that obsession end? For me, yeah, he said that. I'm like,
if it's 30 years, you're a quitter.
Yeah.
No, I was thinking, I did Iaido and karate on Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and tonight before we did this show. I guess that's pretty obsessed, but Sean, I like what Sensei Suino says. He says it in permissions. He says it all the time. Find a great teacher and then follow that teacher. Right? And you said it. I was lucky. Like I stumbled into the dojo, and I honestly, like when I walked into Sensei Legacy's dojo, I knew I was never going to not be his student. After that first second that I walked in, it's like thunderstruck. Like I instantly knew it. And then, you ask, why did I devote myself to Sensei Suino? Sensei Legacy told me to. He said, this guy is the best teacher.
Right.
This guy's the best Iaido teacher you're ever going to find. He's a great human being, a great teacher. So I said, okay, well, I'm already with this amazing teacher. He's telling me this guy's an amazing teacher too. Why would I question? I'm just going to go where my sensei tells me to go. So that's my take on it. I think today there's too much YouTube and too much, as Sensei was saying, you need a sensei. Like you can pick up lots of techniques and different things, but there's, Mukso, Jigiden, Ishinryu, Iaido, direct transmission is a word in the name of that system. Nothing is going to be directly transmitted to you through YouTube. you need to follow somebody to have something directly transmitted to you.
I love that. Thanks, Senseis, for that. Sensei Suino, I want to throw this to you right now because I think you're going to be able to guide us through the right questions, especially because time flies on this show. So if I may, can I throw it to you to guide Sensei Fabian through the next few questions?
Well, I'll stumble along. If I start muttering and sweating profusely, I'm going to ask you take over again.
Okay.
But I'd like to continue the
Sean, take over.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I see a bead right there, Sensei. This is the heat up in your house.
Mm-hmm. This is how it is here. Or as my daughter likes to say, right? Is it hot in here, or is it just me? I want to continue the biography a little bit, Steve. So you talked about Goju Ryu at Colgate. You talked about Taekwondo at Champaign. You started to allude to Japan, but can you talk a little bit about the transition? Where did you go from one to the other, from Taekwondo and etc.?
Right. So eventually, although it seemed to take forever, my wife and I both completed our respective degrees. In the meantime, we gave birth to our first child, our daughter, Brooke Aroy, who's in the audience tonight. How you doing, Beck? And it was time to really regroup. I mean, we'd gotten our degrees. It was time to launch. We were ready to leave that particular phase of life, and we both were sending out applications and looking for opportunities. Asia was kind of a vision, a dream, a hope, but we weren't really counting on it. And we made a deal that we would take the first best offer that came along, and we would just make it work. Well, it just so happened fortuitously that my wife, having studied Japanese and lived in Japan a year previous to our getting together, actually secured a position with a Sumitomo subsidiary company. Sumitomo is one of the big major companies in Japan. And they were offering her a 3-year contract, and they flew us over there and put us up in company housing. And so we were ready to go. And of course, I was living a dream by being in Japan and getting to seek a traditional Japanese martial art in Japan, and not some imported facsimile or something like that. Not to disparage some good programs that are out there, but I was really looking for something to really dig into the roots. And as an anthropologist, I wanted to get as traditional as possible. I had done, two different kick punch styles that did a little bit of grappling, but most of it was kick punch stuff. And I wanted to get into that choke stuff that we were talking about here in the title of the show. And I was literally looking for a jujitsu system and some Japanese traditional weaponry, sword in particular. I was assured by the Japanese friends I had met at the University of Illinois, one a fellow graduate student, that there was no jujitsu in Japan. It was all judo these days. Jujitsu had died. And in the one book that I had access to at that time on jujitsu, written in the 1950s by a Japanese man, pretty much the foreword also said jujitsu is no longer a thing in modern day Japan. Happily it is, but it's not so easy to find. And just again, the fortuitousness, the serendipity of connecting with good teachers that we've already heard a lot about tonight. There's something weird about that, and karma and strange things once you're out there looking for something. Maybe if your intent is true enough for something, I don't know. I don't want to get too crazy about this, but within 2 weeks, I had an introduction to the Hontai Yoshin Ryu Hombu Dojo and had begun my training there. So the rest in that sense is history. I mean, like you guys had found as soon as I walked in the dojo and met Inoue Soke. He's a 2-time Jukendo champion, All Japan champion. That's the bayonet style that they trained a lot in there. But he is the 18th headmaster of this style that comes from the mid 1600s. So a venerable style. Sure, it's gone through changes. I don't think anything in it today is the same as it was in the 1600s. I don't think Japanese bodies are the same as they were in the 1600s. So, there are some changes, but staying true to the core and heart of the system. And, his family just was so generous to me and my family. And that just started a wonderful, intimate 3-year relationship while we were living in Japan, and continued when we relocated back to the States after that.
So can you touch a little bit, I had 2 major introductions when I moved to Japan, and one of them was from Walter Todd, who had been in part of the Japanese occupation forces.
Yeah.
And he wrote me a letter of introduction to Sato Sensei, right, who was one of the founders of Kokusai Budoin. And then it took me about 3.5 months of really hard training with Sato Sensei to get the introduction that I'd really gone to Japan for, which was to Yamaguchi Sensei to learn Iaido. So I had a relatively simple first intro from a martial arts world, and then one that was kind of traditional, right, where you sit on the steps of the temple until they admit you. What was your process like of getting an introduction to Inoue Sensei?
So again, serendipity. A couple, a Japanese woman and her American husband, the husband worked in the same company with my wife, invited us over to welcome us for dinner our first week there in Japan. And we got to talking about mutual interests and things like that. And the man's wife, the Japanese woman, trained in a different style, but in the same, I guess I would call it municipal dojo, where the Hontai Yoshin Ryu is headquartered. And when she heard my interest, maybe trying to find a traditional jujitsu school, she was like, well, I just happened to train in this dojo where I could serve as your introduction to the system. Now, the Hontai Yoshin Ryu is a little bit different from some classical systems in that time, under Inoue Soke, the 18th Headmaster, they had been kind of actively looking to expand overseas. And they, in fact, had students already in a couple of European countries, Italy most significantly, and I think England at that time. They have since opened several branch schools in other European countries. And so it wasn't like they were quite as closed door policy to outsiders as some traditional schools might be. So when I had this introduction from our friend to the dojo, and I met Soke Inoue that evening, and he asked me a couple of questions. Of course, I had no Japanese at the time to speak of. He had a little bit of English, but she actually was able to act as translator. And he found out that I'd had like a dozen years of training already in other systems. And he said, well, come on Wednesday and start training. So basically it was a really, quick and surprisingly easy connection. As it turned out, Soke also said, this must be karma. My son has the same birthday as you do, his younger son, actually. And so there were just weird things that went on. And then, of course, to supply the sword component, he himself took me on as a personal student, training in his private dojo in the Toyama Ryu. So it was a very special set of circumstances. That's all I can say.
Do you remember the first training session?
I do. It was an odd one for me because it was one thing I hadn't been looking for. It was a rope shakubo, a 6-foot staff training session, which is part of the traditional curriculum of Hontai Yoshin Ryu. They had a long historical relationship with the Kukishin Ryu, a 6-foot staff, and 3 to 4 foot stick kind of specialized art. I just hadn't been looking for it. And there I was, all of a sudden, it's my first class and I'm bowing and I'm doing everything else. And, they hand me the 6-foot stick. And I'm like, okay, I'm just going to try to follow along and do what you guys do as best I can. But, I had no previous exposure to it other than playing like with old sunflower stalks with my brother in the fields in the fall. I grew up on a small farm in upstate New York. I really had no like stick art experience and hadn't been looking for it. So I do remember that evening. That the most poignant memory for me, though, for basically my first year of training in jiu-jitsu, was how my wrists and elbows were sore all the time. I mean, some of that might have been from the sword once I started that, but that was a couple months in. I just the joint locks and the manipulations, and you know, Americans, we don't meet force with non-force. We tend to meet force with force. It took me a long time to realize I had to just relax and go with things rather than kind of, you know, strain against them, because that only makes the stuff more effective and hurt worse.
Mm.
And so that's my most poignant memory of the actual training itself is that, and some nights just spending an entire 90 minutes like on one movement kata, just because it was wrong and we just had to keep doing it. And however many throws and falls and elbow twists or whatever it took, that's what we did that night. So yeah.
What year did you go over?
1987.
And you were there for 3 years.
Yep, till 1990.
Gotcha. So we were there at the same time. And where were you?
So the Hombu Dojo for Hontai Yoshin Ryu is in Imazu. It's near Nishinomiya, which is about midway between Kobe and Osaka in the Kansai region.
I have a quick question I want to throw in, because you said something really interesting to me, and I think it has to do, you know, you went for the real deal, non-facsimile, but then you mentioned the fact that the bodies aren't even the same as when this thing was created in the mid 1600s, and I just want to know your thoughts on that idea of the evolution of the arts as even not just bodies, but our perceptions and conceptions change. So it sounds like you went to get something totally original, but you've since understood that there really isn't any such thing.
Well, it's a really big question in anthropological circles. Tradition and continuity versus change. And you know, when we talk about a culture and we talk about the traditions of that culture, or what's traditional, well, what era are you talking about? No culture to survive can stay static. And so, you know, all culture adapts to times and circumstances and influences. The extent to which you can talk about the culture staying true to its core is one thing, but I think a lot of the more superficial kind of elements are definitely going to show the you know, change. I can't speak for other systems. I think that some systems make the claim that they have really, through this process of direct transmission, has stayed very true to what they were doing hundreds of years ago. I think the Hontai Yoshin Ryu does not make that claim. The 17th Soke actually went on record to, you know, he changed. He modified and updated and upgraded some of the kata, the basic training forms. Inoue Soke continued to do that, I think, to some extent, never sacrificing the main principles of the art itself. And it does have some core principles. You know, I think that it just showed a willingness to take into account pressures and influences that were current, and to keep the system alive and current.
So I love that. Now, before we, yes, that's it.
Yeah, I just want to ask another question about that, Sensei Fabian. Would you say, I guess I'm interested if you know, or your opinion on, were physical techniques added, removed? Was it the culture that was changed? Was it all of those things? Was it primarily, like, you know, the attitude of a new Soke coming in is going to cause some change just by a new leader coming, but this is my bad understanding.
No,
you know?
I'm going to say yes as a blanket answer, because my sense of it is that yes, there was a lot of change, and I'll just give you a couple of examples. So you can watch the video that was put out by the Budokan in Japan. They have a video of some of the traditions of Hontai Yoshin Ryu, and they include the 17th Soke doing some older style material that is not, at least when I was training in the dojo, was not being, you know, actively applied, used. So I don't know how much that is a living part of the system still. There are a couple of older sets of forms that are still practiced, but the stuff that I saw him doing on that film, I personally have never seen done by anybody else. And so yes, I think techniques have changed, or they were recrafted and put into maybe to some extent a simplified format for initial kata learning. That's true, but the school also changed a little bit in that when I started training there in '87, people were still wearing keikogi, like the blue kind of quilted top, with or without hakama, could just be regular, karate type trousers or something like that. But there were a lot of traditional, more kind of these older style outfits. And while I was there, Soke made the announcement that everyone was supposed to start wearing white dogi to train in, and either black or dark blue hakama, particularly for demonstration purposes or anything like that. And then the black belts in the system started wearing their black belt over the hakama, which is a style I particularly dislike, and very not fond of. A couple of senior members, relatively highly ranked and longtime practitioners, left the dojo at that time. I mean, I remember that very distinctly because I went with one of the other Menkyo Kaidensha, one of the other top ranking seniors of the school, with a couple of other younger students, and we went and visited these guys to try to get them to come back, because you lose a tremendous component of the inner group, the uchi, the inner group, when these longtime practitioners decide to leave, and they just felt that it had changed more than they were willing to continue to kind of experience or work with. So it was an interesting time, I think, in the Hontai Yoshin Ryu. I think so. Inoue Soke, the 18th Inoue Soke is dead. He's passed on. He transmitted the Soke-ship to his son, Kyoichi, who I also trained with when I was in Japan. And I think Kyoichi has tried to bring the system back to sort of more traditional roots in some respects, but still very much keeping alive the international contacts and kind of spending a lot of his time going and training overseas and things like that. So it's a traditional but modern style. It's an interesting kind of composite of those things.
Thanks so much, Sensei. And I just want to sneak one in before we do our 10 questions. And this is for you as well, Sensei Suino. Having both lived there, and again, I love this anthropological approach you're looking at it with. Do you think that sometimes us as North Americans need the Japanese to stay more rigid than they want to stay because of our glorification of things like Kung Fu and, Bushido and the samurai? And then my other question for you, Sensei Suino, very specifically is, with your sword art, which is, the longest unbroken lineage of a sword art, do you find that it's understood that there are changes, or is it like, no, that's the whole point, is that we believe this would be pretty close to a guy doing it 300 years ago?
Well, as Steve said, it's a really interesting question, and it depends on who you ask. So mainstream Iaido, the All Japan Iaido Federation, has a credo among many, and it's in your training, you'll find that there are 3 phases in your Iaido development. Phase 1 is when you step into the dojo and you learn the art. Phase 2 is when you've essentially learned the art and you spend time perfecting it. Phase 3 is when you begin to make changes and you make it into your own art. There is no phase 3 in Eishin Ryu Iaido.
Right.
I mean, that's stated in there. I mean, it's written down, right? It's written down. There is no phase 3. But what's interesting about that is every time there's a new Soke, guess what he does? He says, well, I was looking at the scrolls and we're going to make these changes, right? Interestingly, when I was there, I think the 21st Soke was also a kabuki actor. And so it's pretty widely understood that there were a lot of affectations and things that were heightened a little bit. And so that during his time and subsequent time, generation or two, the art got a lot more a lot less combative, which is something my teacher didn't care for very much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what about that idea of Japanophiles from outside the country needing it to stay away, that the country's like, we're just evolving over here?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of heresy, isn't it? I had some people get really mad at me after I'd been back from Japan for 9 or 10 years. I told my top students, I'm going to take a year and a half, 2 years, and I'm throwing all the dogma out. I want to find out if I can get to the core and figure out what I believe really works and what the best way to train in is this. I guess that's heresy, but you know, now here I am. I've been doing martial arts for 53 years. I don't know if I'm as good as anybody else, but I do know that I've done it long enough to have some ideas about it. And for me, one of the most valuable things I've done in 53 years was take that year and a half, 2 years and go, I'm not going to accept what I've been taught. And after that period, guess what? I have accepted about 80% of what I was taught. So the system withstands scrutiny, at least from somebody like me who's been hitting the head a lot.
Sensei Fabian, anything you want to add to that idea?
Yeah, a couple of things. So I like what Nick just said. Actually, literally, Kyoichi Sensei, when I was leaving Japan in 1990, literally told me, "Kenkyu stay, research, like figure out what's what in this." And so when there are tweaks in the style and in the kata, which there continue to be, I know it's a couple of things have been said about me. One is that when I was living in Japan, people would tell me, "Oh, you're more Japanese than the Japanese." Nick, you probably heard that as well. And the second thing that they told me when I have come back a couple of times, it's like, "Oh, it's like watching a time machine. Like you're doing this just the way we did it back in the late 80s. And it's like, yeah, that's how I learned it. And I know why I do it that way, because it works. I try to explore and research the movements, and they work. And it's not to say that they don't work doing them maybe a little differently, but they work for me doing them that way. It's the way I originally learned them from Soke, the 18th Soke, and his fellows. And so that's kind of good enough for me. And so I kind of stick with that a little bit more. But yeah, I basically agree. And it is interesting. I just don't know. I mean, especially without videos or composites. I mean, it's even interesting with the makimono or the scrolls. Sometimes the interpretation of what they literally say is, I don't know, it says this, that. And, somebody else might have this just incredible insight and say, nah, it really means, this and so on. So I think it means you need to stay true to the core of the system and what its feeling is like and what the main kind of philosophical underpinnings of it are. And then I think you've got the system, and the physical techniques are expressions of that. And those are going to vary a little bit our bodies are all different. With the different Menkyo Kaidensha teachers at the Hombu Dojo, and one evening there were, up to 4 of them teaching the maybe 6 or 8 of us students who were there learning from them. And every time you got something from one of them, it was a little different than you had just got it from one of the other guys, just enough to kind of keep you off balance and to make you really figure out, well, what's really the important piece of this movement. So yeah, and enough said.
Yeah, thanks so much for that. And the last thing I want to say before we go to our ad and our 10 questions is, Sensei Suino, I do take a little offense about that 21st Soke, because no actor, kabuki or otherwise, has ever been known to add a flourish or embellishment whatsoever.
Fair enough. My mistake,
no,
Sean. I apologize for that.
No, has never happened, and especially not even me.
No,
I've never added flourish to my martial arts at all. Hi, this is Don Warner from WarnerEntertainment.com. WARRENER. We're proud to be one of the sponsors of Punch Kick Choke Chat. We encourage you to visit our website at WarnerEntertainment.com and get your free copy of Warriors Magazine today. We have over 2,500 items, including books, DVDs, downloads, rare posters, and lots more, featuring some of the biggest names in the martial arts. Shudokan's I was trying to memorize it, Sensei. Shudokan's Hidekazu Kanazawa, Coach Ryu's Chuck Merriman, Ninja Stephen Hayes, legendary Joe Louis, and that's just the beginning. That's WarnerEntertainment.com, WARRENER. Thanks for listening, and keep smiling.
Getting better, Sean.
I'm working on it. Thanks, Sensei. I'm working on it. What is it you said? I wrote it down. in order to be good at something, you must be willing to first be bad at it. So
That's
I
second
wrote-
generation knowledge. I got that. I got this earlier this week, and I passed it along to you as mine.
I love it. I love it. That's going on my board. Sensei Fabian, we ask our every guest the 10 questions. We ask for impulsive answers and then expand as needed. What is the most effective move in your martial arts arsenal?
My most effective, I'm not sure, it depends on what's coming at me, but my favorite move is kotegaeshi. It's somebody grabs you in any way or punches at you or something like that, and it's a wrist twist. It's the thing that you see Steven Seagal do where the guy's feet go flying in the air and he comes crashing down on the ground. Usually the effect is not so dramatic, but it is a very effective and extremely easy to apply technique.
Awesome. Who is the most influential martial artist in your life?
Yeah, for me, it would be Soke Inoue.
Mm-hmm. Who do you think is the most influential martial artist of all, and why?
You know, every time I see another magazine cover with Bruce Lee on it, I'm amazed that this guy still has this level of influence. And that's all that I need to say.
Mm-hmm. What excites you most about the next 5 years of your training?
Oh, gosh. Well, the pandemic has certainly wiped out my hand-to-hand training system. We've sold our house. I'm just looking to do whatever kind of training I can. I'm currently training pretty much solo, and that's great, but it's not entirely sufficient or satisfying, fulfilling. So yeah, as the next phase of life unrolls, just trying to figure out exactly what training will mean and how to continue it in the most effective and fulfilling ways possible.
Yeah. If heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you get there?
You tried to make the world a better place.
Love that. I'm just taking that in. Your favorite film and TV martial artist?
So martial artist, that's tough. I love the young Steven Seagal with his combat Aikido. Like his first 3 or 4 films, max maybe. Then he went crazy.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you can't beat some of the Bruce Lee films. Chuck Norris did some good things. I mean, honestly, what I love most, the most influential Japanese martial arts film I've ever seen is the Shichirin no Samurai, the Seven Samurai, by Akira Kurosawa. And that I could watch probably night and day and still learn something from it every time I watch it. It's just an amazing film, both about martial spirit and technique, but also about humanity. So it's an amazing film.
Yeah. What martial artist, living or dead, would you like to train with the most?
I'd like to do a lot more training with you guys, so I'm just going to throw that out there.
First time anybody's answered that.
Yeah. If everyone in the world could have the greatest benefit you've gotten from martial arts, whether they train or not, what would you bestow upon them?
Well, the subtitle of the book I wrote on martial arts, Clearing My Clouds, 9 Lessons for Life, I would like them to become a little more cognizant of those 9 lessons, because once you do, you can kind of be more mindful of how to better do anything you do. And so I guess I would hope that would be part of my legacy there somehow.
Awesome. And the last 2 questions come as one: greatest achievement, greatest regret.
Greatest achievement. Wow. My family. I just feel so blessed to have a great family I have. And so I'm going to just throw that out there. Regret. I'm not sure. I probably never fully, the sword and pen are one, Bunbu Ryoho, Bunbu Ichi, this sense of making life coordinate these two. I'm still hoping to get there. Maybe when I stop teaching in school, that in my retirement years, that I can bring that martial and artistic kind of integration a little bit more to life.
Sensei Suino, I know you had a question about that sword and pen. Do you want to crack that open while we're here?
I don't know that I had a specific question in mind. I'll tell you what question I do want to ask, and I want to make sure I hear this before. I know we've got, a few minutes left. I want to hear, Steve, what was it like to land back in the U.S. After having that intense training experience? To the extent your personal life was affected by that, but most, what was it like to then look around and go, where am I going to train now? What do I do next? What was that experience like for you?
It was a little hairy. We, in coming back from Japan, we were both applying for jobs. I was actually a college teacher at the time, college professor, and I did secure a position as an assistant professor at Hanover College in Southern Indiana. And so that's where we ended up. And I did a demo on campus and immediately had students interested, and thereby founded the Hanover Martial Arts Club. And so it became a really quick kind of fix, frankly. And so it was, that part wasn't as bad as, as it might have been. We have been around and moved and done different things in different places. And so it's been a challenge to always kind of pick things up, but I try to continue offering the training. For 20 years, my dojo was a small room in our house for indoor training that we converted into a mat room, and the outdoors. We trained outdoors in that dojo. Rain, shine, snow, sleet, anything, as long as the students could get there safely, we trained there. And I've got a couple of my students on the program tonight. Thank you, Tom and Jim and Jamila. Of course, Brian Barnes and Matthew have been up there training with me a couple of times. I've also joined them down in Louisville. Just wanted to give a shout out. And of course, want to thank my wife and my daughter who are also on board, and a dear friend, Oksana. I see your name on there. Thank you for joining. That's awesome.
That is awesome. So one thing I want to, and thanks to them for joining us. It really helps all of us when we get not just our regulars, but the new people come in and check out the show. So we really do appreciate you being here. I have a question for you. It's interesting because you are engaged in one of the longest, if not the longest, lineages of the jiu-jitsu. But if I'm not mistaken, a relatively new sword style that was developed for a simple post-Meiji practicality, yeah?
Yeah. The Toyama Ryu is the sword system that was being instructed in the officers training school in the 20s and 30s in Japan. It was particularly kind of designed for that sort of practicality purpose. The system, it's all standing forms, two main basic sets. I mean, there are three different main lines of it these days, but it's a very crisp, brisk, no nonsense style. And somewhat different from the sword system that has been reintroduced into the Hontai Yoshin curriculum. So I do actively train in both of those, and it's, you really have to kind of switch the kimochi a little bit when you're doing it. You gotta kind of change your mentality just a tad.
Sensei Suino, did you have any experience with the Toyama system?
Just from arm's length, just seeing other people do it. One of my fondest memories is I spent a week on an island in the southern part of Japan, and as I was there, I wandered around the island and I asked the folks I was staying with if there were any dojos on the island, and they said, "Oh yeah, there's these two brothers." I may have told the story on the show before, I don't know, but there's these two brothers. They've both been doing karate for years. You should go visit them. And so I stumbled around the island and I found this little shack inside of which was a dojo, and these two Japanese brothers in their early 40s, both just built like cannonballs, just beefy dudes, and they were Shudokan guys, but it didn't look like the long, North American legged Shudokan. It was old-fashioned crunch schmocking Shudokan. And I walked in and they go, "Hey, a foreigner." And I was like, "Yeah, what do you guys do?" "We do karate. Do you want to see some?" And I said, "Yeah." And so they jumped out and they just started wailing on each other. "Bob, Bob." And they would jump back. how was that? And I go,
Ah.
great. I mean, it was amazing. And then after about 20 minutes, and the guys just beat the crap out of each other, and they had a bunch of kids in the room that were just cheering them on. And they said, you know what else? And I'm like, yeah. And they go, we're extras in martial arts movies. And I'm like, oh, that's cool. And they had just come from one of the big, so this would have been about 1990. There was a big Japanese, I think it was Heaven and Earth, I think came out around that time. Anyway, they were dressed up in samurai regalia and they were extras in that movie. And then they started going on and on about Toyama Ryu. And apparently they had been involved with, who's the Ninja Turtle guy? Oh, hell.
Obata?
Yeah, Obata Sensei, right? So anyway, I just stumbled on this dojo in the middle of this island, in a rural island in Japan, and had the best hour experience ever. And lo and behold, whose name should come up was Obata Sensei, and that whole connection. So that's probably the closest I've gotten to Toyama Ryu in my lifetime.
So Sensei Fabian, one thing I want to ask, and I'm always excited when we have, traditional Koryu practitioners of Jiu-Jitsu on, is just your thoughts or your relationship to the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and its absolute current prevalence, flavor du jour, how do you look at that art?
So, I mean, I think Legacy Sensei had earlier said, there are a lot of different styles out there, and there's, a little something for everybody. I guess that's the way I look at it. It's a different system. It's morphed from its Japanese roots. It's very Brazilian. It's very effective for the kind of MMA type of cage fighting that it seems to be getting so much notoriety for. I just warn anybody that I know who says they're going to go and look into training in that system. To me, that system is a little bit like immovable object meets irresistible force. Everybody I know who's trained in it has had some pretty serious injuries. And maybe that's just a weird cross section of people I know, but I mean, jiu-jitsu enthusiasts or stylists used to have these deadly kind of competitions in Japan before Kano Sensei, said, look, this is crazy. Let's kind of change what we do and do it for developmental purposes and not kill each other doing it. And he developed judo. It's a little bit of a rough system if it's not done really well. And, there are a lot of different people who do it. So I think that every place probably has its own character and quality. All the more power to you if you're really trying to follow a way that is sincerely to develop yourself. As long as you're not doing it just to hurt other people, then I think you're probably getting something good out of it.
Right on. Thanks for that, Sensei. And then can you talk a little bit for the people listening and me about where the weapons and what the weapons look like as they fit in to your Hontai Yoshin Ryu?
Yeah. So, I mean, I really do think of the system as a triad, not only my mind, body, spirit emphasis, but empty-handed jujitsu, stick arts with the bojutsu, and Iai Jitsu with the sword training. Even had that tattooed on my arm. I don't know if you can see my, I don't think you can see it.
We can when you go more like this. Yeah, there we go.
It doesn't work so well, but anyway, I've got a Mitsu Tomoe tattooed on my arm, expressive of this sense of all of them being unique and distinct, but also coalescing into a whole. And all of them are just means to the end of personal development, self-development. And self-development is just there so that you have more to give to society and to others. So there's my philosophy and a thimble.
Mm-hmm. And can you break down just the practical, like what weapons you're putting your hands on a regular basis? And is it a bunch of kata? Is it, how are you applying them?
So there's four main weapons that I train in regularly, and it's the regular katana and a kodachi or wakizashi, the short sword, and then there's the rokushakubo or 6-foot staff, and the 3 to 4 foot stick, that hambo, that goes along with that. There's an entire set of basics: kihon, bo awase, paired training and kumidachi or kata for the rokushakubo. There are a couple of sets of very short kata between hanbo and swordsman, and some basics with that as well. And then the sword, it's actually a very broad repertoire, because I train in the 2 different sets of kata for Toyama Ryu, and Hontai Yoshin Ryu has 3 or 4 sets, standing sets. It also has some swariwaza seated sets. I don't tend to train those. And the wakizashi also has a couple of sets, a main set and an ura set, where you do very similar strikes, but with the back end of the blade, or the heel of the blade, to make a submission as opposed to a kill of your attacker.
So then a question I have for both you and Sensei Suino again is, Sensei Suino, is there much overlap in your Japanese Jiu-Jitsu arts? And also, how are you gentlemen training this solo right now? And then also, Sensei Suino, I haven't heard you talk so much about the wakizashi. Is that something you train as well?
Well, there's very minimal weaponry in the Nihon Jiu-Jitsu that I train in. It's a very different system, because it's essentially a modern composite system of older ones, right? So it was founded by Sato Sensei. It's post-World War II, so it has techniques, but it's not a family style system. We do a little tambo, short stick, and we do some defense against tambo and against a tanto. And one thing that will point to its modernity is we also do defense against pistol. There is wakizashi in Iaido, but it's very little practiced, and a little esoteric. So you just don't see it very much in mainstream Asian Ryu Iaido. Very little of it. Yeah.
And then how are you maintaining your jiu-jitsu during the quarantines and things?
We have some really creative people in our school who figured out how to build something, a stick with a flexible middle section, so we could practice wrist locks and things like that during the COVID. We are now back to masked contact.
Okay.
So we are basically in our Nihon Jiu-Jitsu classes, we're basically back to normal training. Yeah.
Right. And Sensei Fabian, how about you? Are you focusing more on the weaponry during the downtime, or are you soloing?
No, I still do all 3 components. I'm just doing the jiu-jitsu completely, entirely solo. It's great for visualization. I had to do a session of solo training years ago, actually a couple decades ago, when I was recuperating from some injury. And you can ask Barnes Sensei, who's here, when he brought some of the students up to train with me when I was finally back to training with other people. And I think he was surprised at how effective my jiu-jitsu had become. Not that it wasn't, but when you're forced to kind of visualize and really kind of dive within yourself for what the movements are doing, and focus more on centering your ki, your vital energy, and all of that, and applying that, it can have some positive impact on what you're able to do with it. So that's interesting. I have been teaching jiu-jitsu stuff at the high school where I teach, but that also was shut down this year. I'm not sure what the future of that will be next year either yet.
So look, we all have our other lives aside from the martial arts. And then how do you find that being a teacher at a high school, that your martial arts fits into that, relating to the students?
Yeah, well, I mean, like I say, so for one thing, I've taught it at the school. And so, it's just a thing. But martial arts, being a martial artist, if you really take it for all it's worth, it should make you better at everything you do. And I think it's made me a better teacher, better able to relate to the students and what they're thinking and feeling, and connecting with them in that way. Not that I come down to their level per se. I think there's a level of empathy I'm able to achieve, and based on that, maybe be able to present something in different ways that can be grasped better by a diversity of students. than, if I was just bringing my thing and just paying attention what I wanted to share. So I think that's a lot that's come from the martial arts. You can't get better at the martial arts unless you really dig into who you are, what you're doing, and why and how, and all of that. And that basically is the same process then you can apply everywhere else, except that you know yourself a little better going into into those things.
Hanshi Legacy, when he talks about the martial arts should make you better at everything, I see you really nodding and taking that in. Is there anything you want to add to that or agree with?
Speaking to me?
Yep.
Yeah. Well, actually, yes. I was thinking that all the classical martial artists always, for the lack of better words, sound the same. They're always coming from the same place. It's always more about the art than it is about themselves, because they use the art to make themselves, to better themselves and other persons. Right? I sort of like that, as opposed to the guys who come on and say, well, it's all about the best technique or all that. There's so much more. Classical martial artists are the real roots, yeah, to the future.
Thanks, Hanshi. Sensei Fabian, I just want to throw something out. I grew up, my parents were both professors, so I know from PhDs and all the friends were. And it's just a straightforward question. To what do you attribute your humility? Because I haven't talked to a lot of PhDs who are teaching their high school kids and want to, most of the ones I have met tend toward I have the answers.
Yeah.
And you don't in this conversation.
Thank you, Sean. I really appreciate that perspective. I grew up in a blue collar family. My dad had 8 grades of education. My mom managed to graduate from high school, but first generation college, didn't really know what I was doing at school, didn't know what I was going to major in when I went to school. The cultural anthropology bug kind of bit me somewhere along the line in there, and I just continued taking that. I think mainly because of my interest in humans and what makes us tick and who we are and all of that. I don't know. I mean, maybe it's my background, maybe it's my just the way I look at the world, but certainly that's come from and been influenced by my parents and other people in my life. I just think that if we are all about us, it's a pretty narrow experience and pretty narrow view of the world. And it's just really important to do what we do. In Hebrew, there's an expression, tikkun olam, to sort of perfect the world, make the world a better place. I think that that's something that if we're not all trying to do a little bit of, we're probably missing the boat. So I don't. That's
Sensei Dauphin, I see you really connecting with that. Any thoughts? Any ideas you want to add?
I think we're all in that. I was liking what he said about being from a blue collar family, first generation graduate. I can relate to that because that's my story too, right? My dad, grade 9 graduate, my mom, grade 10, but somehow I got it through.
Yeah. Yeah. And where do you gentlemen, I mean, maybe you don't, but where do you put the martial arts for that? Where do you put that as part of the ability to go, yeah, these things are true, but that's not what it's about?
For me, I mean, I've written about this in Clearing Away Clouds, although obviously people do it without that martial background. I think for me in particular, once I got engaged in the martial arts and really dedicated serious effort to it, I mean, it's allowed me to do everything else I've done in my life. It just has empowered me in ways in terms of confidence, humility as well. It's just, it's a very rich and full avocation when you really, really just dive into it and swim in those waters. So.
Yeah, I just love the idea that, all the posters in the 80s say get confidence, and we all get confidence, but we also get humility. Sensei Suino, where does that come from? Like, what's that wonderful paradox that you gain all the confidence to walk in any room on the planet humbly?
Yeah, I mean, we've all had our asses kicked plenty of times, right? Oh, that's so funny. God,
I love that.
I was just reflecting, on this today. I think I owe everything I am today to the martial arts, right? To the attitudes I got from the martial arts. A friend of mine a Taekwondo competitor, used to own a school in Michigan. He lives out in Colorado now. Dan Vigil said something to me years and years ago. He said, I think martial arts were the first personal development system. You think thousands of years ago when you had to take these young men and you had to say, listen, you're going to take swords and sticks and eventually guns, and you're going to go out there and you're probably going to die today. And if you don't die, you're going to get maimed and you're going to kill somebody else, or you're going to destroy somebody else's life. Like, how do you prepare people for that? Not just tactically, right? But how do you prepare their minds?
Mm-hmm.
In Japan, we have a whole schema for that, right? It's the whole Zen training and all that kind of stuff, and the selflessness and non-attachment. But even if you're just a Taekwondo competitor, or just a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu competitor, just a judo person, if you just spar in karate, you're still getting that lesson, man.
Yeah.
It's that's a subject of many, many hours of conversation. It's deep stuff, and it's just you're young, you want to go out there and punch somebody in the face, and if you're not a quitter, 30 or 40 years later, you just have a completely different look at the world.
It's interesting, since as soon as you're saying that, just tonight I was teaching, and there's a couple of young people in the class, their parents were here, and I said, we've all had this question. Can you teach my kid to be more confident? Can you help my kid to be more compassionate? Can you help my kid to be more disciplined? And I always answer yes to all of that. And they say, how are you going to do that when other people can't do it? His school teachers can't do it, and her priest or whoever can't do it. Her parents can't do it. I always say, well, I'm going to teach him how to fight. And when they get punched in the face, they're going to realize that it hurts, and then they're not going to want to punch other people in the face, right? And when they get slammed on the ground, when they're going to realize, oh, I got to get back up and I got to do this. And when they're standing across from somebody who they know is going to kick their ass, they know they're going to have to move forward and fight, because otherwise their ass is really going to get kicked worse. And yeah, so I think those lessons all come out of martial arts.
Love that. Sensei Fabian, I see you really taking what he just said in, yeah?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and implicit in all of that is the courage part that it takes to face that next opponent, or to pull yourself off the floor when you're just going to end up back there again. And I think that courage part is a big part of both the confidence and the humility, because once you really craft that sense that, yeah, I'm just going to do it, and that gives you confidence, but it also makes you a little humble, because like Nick suggested, and you knew what it took to get there. I mean, I can count some broken bones on the way. It's we all have, those kind of memories of where we let a guard down or just did something stupid. And yeah, it makes you more, makes more of you. It crafts you, that it's a little cliche to say it builds character, but by God, it does.
Well, as you gentlemen are talking, I'm just thinking about the idea that, like, a bully is only trying to fight someone who's worse than them at fighting.
Right.
And every one of us goes, who's better than us so we can fight them? And we will lose, but we'll win by losing. Like, that's the difference, right? It's like, I'm going to go fight Sensei Dauphin as soon as possible. And the learning will go great for me. The fighting, not so much. And I can't wait. I can't believe the time has flown, because we are now at the wind-up portion of this. Sensei Fabian, the way we do this is we go around the horn. We all say our thoughts about our conversation we've had. It's a bit of a, we pay tribute to your time and your words. And so we start with Hanshi Legacy, and then the last word, other than a little bit of housekeeping, will go to you, Sensei Fabian. Hanshi Legacy?
Well, I guess I already said my piece. That I really enjoy listening to other classical martial artists, because we usually share the same loves for the art, and the important parts always come out, whereas some persons, they talk about martial arts all night and not say anything important. And I appreciate re-meeting you. We met before, I believe, and it was nice to see you again. And thank you for coming on.
Thank you, Sensei.
Okay.
Thanks, Hanshi. Sensei Suino?
Well, Steve, it's been too long, and we have to remedy this. It's stupid not to have been together more often.
Agreed.
even, for a glass of wine.
Yeah.
But I always love chatting with you, and I have so many wonderful memories of the last time you came to Michigan when we were ferrying you back and forth, to your hotel, and just the conversations we'd get to in the car, which is really the essence of punch, kick, choke, and chat, right? It's like bullshitting about martial arts with somebody in a car or in a restaurant.
Mm-hmm.
So much common history. I mean, we barely got into
Yeah.
the conversation, as always happens.
Yeah.
We'll do this again. But man, it's just it's great to see you.
Thank you so much, Sensei Suino. Sensei Dofan.
So Sensei Fabian, I always write notes because I like to prove that I was paying attention and that I've learned something from the sensei who was on the call with us. And just some of the things that really resonate with me that you said. So one, I want to say, I find it really hard to write stuff when you're talking because I'm just enjoying so much of what you're saying. Like you're an excellent speaker. Your recall is really good. And you're just very dynamic and engaging when you're talking. I really enjoyed it. I did like when you said in the beginning about being nervous when you were fighting, and that nervousness made you train harder and want to do it more and fight more to get good at it. I like that idea. I like that thought. I can picture you doing that. I like that you talk about your system and that you were actually part of the history of Iaido coming into that system, that it wasn't there. And then you were part of the living history of that happening. I think that's really neat. It really resonates, Sensei, that you're a family man, that you love your wife and you're proud of your kids. And I don't think any other guest has mentioned their family as much as you. And that was really nice to hear. I'm a family man too. I love my kids and my partner, Christine. So that resonates with me as well. I think it's kind of funny that you went to Japan and they said there's no jujitsu here. That made me kind of laugh. Who are these people saying that there's no jujitsu in Japan? It's super cool that you train with the 18th Soke headmaster of your system. Like that's something, not many people can make that claim, but you can. I like that you said that your wrists and elbows were extremely sore. And it took some time for you to learn not to meet force with force. I think more than anything, I really like that you're a traditional martial artist that just steps up and says, my system has changed a lot. You can be a traditional martial artist and your system can evolve and change, and you can still be a traditional martial artist. You don't have to be a slave to something that happened in the 14th century. I love that. I like that when you said that your favorite technique, which I don't know what the actual Japanese terminology for it, but I really like that you said it's just easy and effective to apply. That should be everybody's favorite technique, is one that's easy and effective, right? I like that you said that you hope that God would say that you had made the world a better place. And I guess the final thing was that if you train really well, and you become good at martial arts, it's going to make everything in your life and everything that you do better. That's something that I'll be thinking about. I know that, but it's nice to hear it from somebody who's senior to me in martial arts. So thank you very much, Sensei Fabian. I agree with Sensei Suino. I really look forward to seeing you and any of your crew that want to train, all nice people. It would be very, very good to see you again as soon as possible.
Well, ditto. Thank you, guys. Honestly, wonderful experience being here and exchanging our thoughts with each other. Randy, you get an A+ if I were assessing your your quality of understanding of what class was about today. So that was a great playback. Yeah, it's just strip away all the nonsense or the bullshit and just do it and keep doing it. And one of the living national treasures of Japan that was captured on the National Geographic show highlighting those people, he said that in terms of of just doing his art, he said he was just going to get up and train in it. He was not a martial artist. I believe he was a bunraku puppeteer. But anyway, I'm going to get up and train in it and try to do my best in it every day until I die. And it's like, it's just, that's what it's about. It's just committing to it, kind of, humbly, that there's so much here and it can give so much to you. But you have to put into it to do that. And so that's what it's about. And unless you continue to do that, you lose a little bit of what you can get from it. So it's a commitment, and you just do what you can with that. So anyway, thank you guys for re-inspiring me to continue doing what I do and love doing. I hope I can continue to share it as much as I can with others, because that's important too. And I'm happy to get down with you guys anytime we can. So
Cannot wait for that. I cannot wait for that. Thanks so much, Sensei. It's been such a pleasure to have you as a guest, and I'm reiterating a few things that I've said, but I really love that the way you look at the anthropological aspect of, these things aren't practiced in a vacuum, and these things aren't static. They're part of a culture, and that culture is now global. And I really love, like, when you talk about that, I just immediately go, right, this is of the people, by the people, not, it's not a diamond being handed down. It's fluid. And then the humility. And I love what you said about BJJ, like, it's, I really like the way you mentioned that, I do practice it, and I'm always fucking tweaked up from it. It's a very, very boom kind of thing. And you made me think about how I practice it, and that maybe there's a softer way. So thank you for that. To everybody, I just want to say hi, because this is Don Warner, WARRENER entertainment.com. We are proud to be one of the sponsors of Punch Kick Choke Chat, and encourage you to visit our website at warnerentertainment.com to get your free copy of Warriors Magazine today. We have over 2,500 items, including books, DVDs, downloads, rare posters, and lots more, featuring some of the biggest names in the martial arts, including Shudokan's Hirokazu Kanazawa, Goju Ryu's Chuck Merriman, Ninja Stephen Hayes, legendary Joe Louis, and that's just the beginning. That's Warner, WARRENER entertainment.com. Thanks for listening, and because it's the last one of the night, really thank you for listening, and keep smiling. Sensei Do-fan, tell us about next week.
Next week is the OGs of Punch Kick Chat. It's just going to be you and I, and Sensei Suino and Sensei Legacy, and those are often some of the funniest, and I don't know, the shit often comes out in those conversations. And I'm really looking forward to it. It's one of those ones where we kind of are like, if anybody signs in, that's great, and if they don't, we don't care about that either. Well, we do care, but it'll be fun one way or the other. And just remember, next week, for those who are on the call, if you have a question, we're turning your camera on, and we're turning your microphone on, and we want to hear you ask the question, and we want you to be part of the conversation.
Yep.
And, while we like people like Honchitarian and Sensei Copeland to get on there and ask their question, and I think that's great for the show. I love it. I would love it if, like, a yellow belt or a purple belt or somebody who is more junior decided that they wanted to sign in. They were brave enough to get on here with us and ask us a couple questions. So that's next week. And then we'll be back. I'm not going to say yet who, but chatting with some people now. So
awesome. Thanks so much for that, Sensei. Hanshi Legacy always says, no one of us is smarter than all of us. No one of us is stronger than all of us. Tonight, Andrei Sedyshev was our host. Robert Shlumsky, who's our most host, was not here. And that to me just speaks to the strength of what we've been lucky enough to create here, because someone could just fill in and you don't know the difference at home. The other people who I want to give thanks to, who helped make Punch Kick Choke Chat happen, are Robert Shlumsky, Mike Russell, Victoria Pfaff, Justin Shea, Alden Adair, Andre, who I mentioned, who's doing tonight. We really, 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 really couldn't do it without you. It means the world to us that we get to do the fun on camera part, and you're making sure that everybody gets the digital info filtered to them. Remember that this is all on every podcast platform. You can catch this later on YouTube. By the way, go back and revisit these episodes. I have. Wow. Now that we got the groove going, now that the chat part of the Punch Kick Choke Chat's kicking in, it's really nice to feather back and realize that this is all interwoven. I mean, this is not just one single linear narrative. there's so much of this, and it's a really beautiful thing to chat with one gentleman or woman and then go back. So I highly recommend that, to revisit these. Sensei, you're really nodding along with that one.
Yeah, you got to go back and look at those. You could binge watch an entire season of something on Netflix quicker than you could binge watch all of the episodes that we've done. It's
So rad.
hundreds of hours of masters talking now.
Yeah, and we aren't at the 1 year, but we're real close, and we'll make sure we let you know when that's coming, because there's no way we're letting that go by without commemorating it somehow. Maybe I'll get those helium balloons that people get when they're like 100K followers, and it's like, you know, the influencers. Anyways, I just want to say thank you so much, everybody, for watching. Thank you to my senseis and co-hosts, and everybody, please be safe. Can't wait to see you next week, and we're really looking forward to the host chat.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Steve.
Fabian.
Stay healthy.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Stephen.